populist right-wing parties in both Canada and Australia are facing electoral defeat against more moderate centre-left parties, Germany finds itself facing an altogether different conundrum. On Friday, Germany's domestic spy agency announced their decision to classify the far-right Alternative für Deutschland party as, and I quote, extremist. A move met by condemnation in the US, with Secretary of State Marco Rubio describing it as a, and I quote here again, tyranny in disguise. Federal Minister of the Interior Nancy Faeser gave a statement about the AfD on Friday.
Vielen Dank und guten Morgen. Die neue Bewertung des Bundesamtes für Verfassungsschutz ist klar und eindeutig. Die AfD ist als gesichert rechtsextremistische Partei.
Now, for the non-German speaking members of the community, she is saying that the new assessment of the federal office is clear. The AfD can be classified as a right-wing extremist party. So what happens to the party? Well, the AfD came second in February's general election and is polling at around 25%, equaling and even overtaking the ruling party. Well, joining us in the studio is Nina Dos Santos, a former CNN anchor and host of the podcast Control, Alt, Deceit, Democracy in Danger. Nina, thanks for coming in.
Thanks so much for having me, Alexis.
This is very odd and possibly very confusing for Germans as well, because you have the second most popular party, first most popular party in some regions of Germany, like Brandenburg, being classed as an extremist party.
This is part of the scenario that the whole of the EU is having to deal with at the moment. These insurgent parties capturing up to 30% of the vote. Look, we had a local election in this country, in the UK, that has Brexited, that saw an insurgent party reform capture a similar sort of proportion of the popular vote if it wasn't a local election and was a national election. And you're seeing similar scenarios playing out in places like Germany and also France, and even more worryingly recently, Romania, where there was a presidential election where an insurgent candidate who allegedly had been backed by Russia, he denies that, but there are enough concerns across the EU and across the Romanian judiciary for that election to actually have been cancelled after so many people voted for that particular candidate. And what we've had here is just a couple of months on from these federal elections in Germany, where, as you were pointing out in your introduction, the AfD came in second position, capturing 1 in 5 votes. Now, suddenly, they have been deemed in a 1,000-plus page report as being extremists.
What does that mean? What is the evidence levelled against AfD? Is it things that their members are saying, that they're sharing online? How are they quantifying that label of extremism?
Well, as you pointed out before, there are other parts of Germany, particularly in eastern Germany, like Thuringia, also Saxony-Anhalt, and so on and so forth, where their local branches have already been deemed as being extremist for some time. What this report that came out this week, that numbers 1,100 pages by the intelligence services. Exactly, a full disclosure, even in German, which you speak and I speak and are very interested in. I haven't managed to wade my way through all 1,000 or so pages. I've read little chunks of it, and essentially the broad thesis of this report is that AfD, if it were to run Germany, would have 2 classes of citizens. Those who were German, who were ethnically German and born and brought up in Germany, of German parentage and basically of Christian backgrounds, and anybody who was from a second or third or first generation parentage, particularly from Muslim communities, would be deemed to be a second-class citizen. That's essentially what they're saying in this report, and as a result, they say that that would be undemocratic, and as a result, this is an organisation that they believe is an extremist organisation. Now, what does that mean, Alexis?
Yeah, because they're in the Bundestag. I mean, they've got a lot of seats in the Bundestag. I think they're the official opposition, basically.
Yeah, that's right. And so this presents a real democratic conundrum for Germany and for a nascent government that, by the way, was only just agreed its coalition agreement just a few days ago between the centre-right and centre-left parties. And we're expecting Friedrich Merz of the Christian Democrats to take the helm of the German Chancellery in just a week or so from now. And this presents a real problem for them, as you said, because domestically it appears as though the sort of mainstream parties are trying to ban the insurgent party that's captured the second largest share of the vote. What it means is that the domestic intelligence agencies, and this is what Marco Rubio has a problem with, would have the right now to recruit informants to spy on the AfD, and also it means that those other parties that want to continue to push that narrative that this is a party that should be banned would obviously be emboldened by this domestic intelligence report.
How has this report gone down with the German people? I was going to say AfD supporters obviously are going to disagree with it, but how has the rest of Germany taken this report?
I think Germany at the moment we can see is quite a divided country. And let's face it, the AfD plays upon those divisions. This is a country that was only unified back after the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, and then we had reunification in 1990. There are still deep generational divides between East and West Germany, even inside Berlin, the capital. Obviously, the capital now. Previously, we had West Germany had its own capital previously. There are big divisions. And I think what the AfD does is it plays upon that very, very effectively. It also plays upon the narrative that Germany just can't control its borders when it's inside the EU. And the other thing that you've got to remember is that you've got this cross-pollination, this sort of ping-pong effect between these far-right parties saying, look, we are not insurgent parties anymore. 30% of our populations, whether it's in France, whether it's, say, in the UK, as I said, based on the projections of the local elections, or in Germany or elsewhere, between 25 and 30% of the population are voting for us because there's something about our policy mix that they actually agree with. And you pointed out before that when it comes to recent polling, the polls have actually flipped in Germany. There was a poll that was published about a week or so ago that actually put the AfD in number one position at 26% of the population versus Friedrich Merz's Christian Democratic Union at 25%. So they may well have eclipsed them just by a smidgen.
So he's just got into government already. He's less popular than he was before the elections.
By 1%. But again, it just goes to show that how volatile these situations are. It's a similar situation to the one we're facing with the competition from Reform, where obviously they won a by-election, but by the slimmest of majorities, only by 6 seats.
And is there frustration in Germany among the German people, and particularly among the AfD voters, that they seem to have grown more than anybody else? They seem to be coming second and first in local elections, but they always seem to be prevented from really taking power. At some point, that is going to have to break, isn't it?
Well, remember that Germany as well is sort of one of those federal systems. So it's slightly different to the type of narrative that you're seeing playing out in France, where you have a more cohesive argument that is being made saying, look, the judiciary is preventing the candidate of Marine Le Pen from actually standing in the 2027 presidential elections because the polls show that she may well win that vote. It's more fragmented in Germany because you have the individual Länder, the individual parts of Germany.
But in many occasions, in the individual Länder, in Brandenburg and Thuringia, where the AfD do very well, sometimes they're prevented from getting into power because coalitions are made by smaller parties who manage to get together, scrape a majority together by a coalition and putting the AfD out of power because, of course, people have vowed not to work with them. How much of a headache is this for Friedrich Merz? I know he's managed to get his coalition together now, but this ruling, does it make his job even harder? Because Friedrich Merz did use the AfD in the previous government to pass a rather contentious immigration law. Now, of course, that can't happen again, can it?
You're right. That's a very important point. Yes, he tried to rely upon their support to try and put forward a resolution saying that, it was time Germany didn't take as many migrants and that, it changed its rules on asylum seeking and so on and so forth. And Germany has actually already tacked quite a bit to the right on the issue of immigration. Remember that a few months ago it decided to sort of unilaterally shut its borders to asylum seekers, completely wrong-footing other countries on its borders like France and Austria that were very aggrieved that they didn't have any prior notice of these types of decisions. So I think, obviously, it's very clear that the centre-right and centre-left coalition is going to have to tack further and further to the right. And that's what these types of insurgent parties also want as well, don't they? They don't yet have a seat in government, but they are able to continuously dictate the narrative on certain flashpoints, like, for instance, immigration. Friedrich Merz, we'll have to see, is probably going to take up the helm of the German Chancellery in about 6 or 7 days' time when there's a vote in the Parliament. And I think he's probably going to have to deal with two things. On the one hand, a very tense economic relationship and trading relationship with the United States. He's going to have to try and reshape Europe to see whether or not they can salvage what's left of the Western alliance, if there's perhaps no transatlantic alliance, unless they can, continue to keep Canada on board and, try and rebuild, that from the ashes of Donald Trump's smash and burn return policy. But I think they're also going to continue to face this sort of chipping away of their democratic mandate in Germany from people like Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance, who will continue to say, well, look, Europe and Germany in particular is stifling free speech, especially when it comes to people who want to vote for some of these insurgent parties like the AfD, Călin Georgescu in Romania, or the Rassemblement National in France.
Tyranny in disguise. Just last question. That was Marco Rubio's words, I should say. Tyranny in disguise. And this decision...
Sounds like a novel, doesn't it?
Yeah, concerning the AfD. Just a final question, Nina. What is the relationship, if indeed there is any relationship, between Friedrich Merz and Donald Trump? Do they have a relationship at all? Because Friedrich Merz has been quite strong when it comes to support for Ukraine. He didn't take well to J.D. Vance and his speech at the Munich Security Conference, where he says the danger was in Europe from within. You know, all that didn't seem... He seemed to be quite firm when it came to Donald Trump. Do they have a relationship, the two of them?
Well, we're in an ironic position here because the West is kind of relying upon Germany to save the West, when up until recently the United States appeared to be building the West as a political construct to save parts of Europe from Germany. And so the world has definitely politically, from this point of view, reversed. I think Friedrich Merz used to be at the helm, as far as I understand, of the Transatlantic Bridge Organization, which is a sort of big business lobby group, that tried to foster closer transatlantic trading relationships for quite some time with Germany and American firms. So he's a lawyer. He's, served on boards of big companies. He's very well placed to kind of make the economic counter-argument in a way that, say, Mark Carney is obviously well placed as an economist, and a very respected business person to try and push back against some of Donald Trump's more protectionist narratives. Recently, I'd argue that Friedrich Merz has been keeping a lower profile. He's actually been allowing Ursula von der Leyen to take a lot of the flack. She apparently, reportedly, has been blacklisted from the White House and famously hasn't been extended an invitation, despite the fact that she's at the helm of one of the biggest trading blocs in the world, representing 450 million people. The question I have after May the 6th and 7th, when we finally see Friedrich Merz as Chancellor of Germany, is he the one who's going to step forward and start negotiating for Europe rather than Ursula von der Leyen and take on some of the mantle of that? And will he be better respected by Donald Trump? It may well be.
Yeah, it's fascinating, of course, because Macron is on his way out, of course. So it might be down to Friedrich Merz to be that sort of voice from Europe.
He's even taller than Donald Trump, I understand, at 6'7" or 6'9", so that
Donald
might
Trump
make some difference.
He's not going to like that, is he?
Look him straight in the eye.
He's not going to like that. Nina, really a pleasure to see you in the studio. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for giving us all this time. Pleasure
Thanks
to
for
speak.
having me, Alexis.
Thank you. Nina Dos Santos there, former CNN anchor and the host of Control, Alt, Deceit, Democracy in Danger.